when the world has got you down. And
Alzheimer's sucks. It's an equal opportunity disease that chips away at everything we hold dear. And to date, there's no cure. So until there is, we continue to fight with the most powerful tool in our arsenal, love. This is Love Conquers Alls, a real and really positive podcast that takes a deep dive into everything Alzheimer's, the good, the bad, and everything in between. And now, here are your hosts, Susie Singer-Carter and me, Don Priest.
Hello, everybody. I'm Susie Singer-Carter.
And I'm Don Priest, and this is Love Conquers Alls. Hello, Susan.
Good morning, Donald. How are you?
I'm swell. It's Saturday morning. It's beautiful. It's about 73 degrees out. My Rams are in the Super Bowl. I'm going to golf tomorrow. What could be better?
It all sounds like heaven to me.
It's heaven. And as we know, life is perfect, right?
Yeah, football and golf, what could be better?
Your two favorites. What I meant to say is I'm going shopping tomorrow, and I'll be shopping all day.
Well, now, okay.
Better?
Now we're happy. Yes, much better. Where are we going?
Oh, anywhere you want. How's that?
See, who needs marriage? I have a best friend. This is great. Oh my God, my Siri just went on.
What?
Nobody. I hate my Siri. Wait, don't talk. Hold on.
Wait, maybe she could be a guest.
Who's Siri? No, it's an English fellow. Oh my God. I hate him. Don't say the word.
I find it amusing.
Okay, so just see, we were just talking about technology and how perfect it is.
It is, and it's not.
Okay, see, that thing is talking in my ears to me right now.
Wow.
Yeah.
This is
he's
awesome.
Very
I wish
invasive.
we could hear it.
Yeah.
I wish we could hear it. So hopefully that's going off through the entire show. That would be amazing.
Wouldn't it be fabulous? I got to turn that off. So what else is happening besides that? Anything exciting?
I don't know. Just,
before we dive into caregiving and
yeah. Not much. I'm just, working, trying to get through, maybe this pandemic will end, I don't know, tomorrow. I doubt it. It's just an ongoing struggle and just trying to remain positive, and, that's all we can do. How about on your side?
Well, on my side, I have a little bit of, it's been a weird time. My mother has been in the hospital for 3 weeks. And, it's completely up in the air what is going to happen. It really ties into today's conversation based off of on our last episode, actually, with Rick Mountcastle, the Attorney General, because we were talking about the systemic issues, the crisis of caregiving and the crisis in our country, and how we have such a lack of attention and focus on the infrastructure of growing older as a society. And during the pandemic in particular, my mother has been in assisted living. Obviously, she's she's very progressed in her Alzheimer's and yet living a very happy life in the stage that she's at. And we talked about the fact of how sad it is that even in the situation where my mom is in a very, one of the best rated homes, Jewish home across the country, their nurse to resident ratio is amazing. It's 5-1, but with the pandemic, it's really put pressure on them. And every other day we were getting 15 people where staff had to go home, 10 members staff had to go quarantine. And so you wonder, how are they taking care of the residents? Well, honestly, they're not. They can't. And my mother ended up in the hospital completely dehydrated with 10% kidney function. Pneumonia, went into pneumonia.
Yeah.
She had an enormous bed sore. And, so she ended up being intubated for 2.5 weeks. She just got it out early in the week, and then now she's on a feeding tube. So, and I'm not saying this to be depressing or, trying to, I'm sharing this because it really plays into the topic that we're going to talk about with our guest today, because Rick Montcastle on our last episode, he predicted this. He laid it out exactly what happened to my mom. And he said, the sad part is that a resident sitting in their urine for 6 hours is the norm. And that's not acceptable. It's just not acceptable. And we have to do something about it. And even, whether you're on Medicare or Medicaid or you're paying out of your pocket, which we did for 15 years, a lot of money, it's not acceptable because we wouldn't do that to children when they're growing up. We wouldn't do that with, the regulations for childcare are stringent. So we need to, do that. And that's why I'm excited about talking to our guest today. So,
Yes.
Dawn, why don't you introduce our guest?
Well, our guest today is Debbie Howard. And Debbie is an author, speaker, and founder of Aging Matters International and the CaregivingJourney.com. She's a former caregiver on a mission to change the way we look at caregiving so the impacts are not so devastating. She's authored 2 books, The Caregiving Journey, Information, Guidance, Inspiration, and her second book, The Caregiving Crisis, What It Costs Your Business and How to Fix It. Debbie obviously has a plethora of information in this important arena, and we can't wait to find out more. So let's not wait. Let's say hello to Debbie Howard. Hello, Debbie.
Hi there, Dawn.
Debbie.
Nice to see you, Susie.
Hi, Debbie.
Nice to see you, Dawn.
It's
Pleasure
a pleasure to have you. I mean, this topic could not be any more, potent for me right now and resonates so deeply, as I said in the introduction, because, this doesn't just affect me. And I am an advocate for my mom. Imagine the people that don't have advocates, right?
Absolutely.
And this is it's a tragedy.
It is a tragedy.
It's a tragedy.
And I think what you're doing for your mom is amazing. And so many people don't have daughters or loved ones who can advocate for them. And it really is very, very important.
It very much is. But so before we dive into all the hard stuff, and apologies up front for this being such an intense episode, but it's really a necessary episode. We really need to talk about it, and it's in the forefront in my mind because of my mother. And it's really powerful to put a face to the problem, and I am right now the face to it. And this is probably the hardest time in my life, literally. And I've been through a lot of hard things, but when especially during COVID, when you're not allowed to go into the hospitals, and you're really living in hope at all times that what you want to happen, it will actually happen. So this is why it's so important. So, but first, I just wanted the audience to know a little bit more about you and why you're such a lovely, brilliant human being, and how I met you through our community, and you were hosting a fantastic room on Clubhouse, which is really a powerful room. And so, tell us a little bit about how you got so passionate about caregiving and the warrior that you are.
Well, thank you so much, Susie. I really love the landscape of caregiving and all the wonderful people I've met, like yourselves, and it's just this whole new adventure for me. It's not that new, but I'll give you the little backstory now. My mother was diagnosed in 2007 with stage 4 lung cancer, and I was working in Tokyo, Japan at the time, running my market research consultancy. And I'm the oldest of 3 daughters, so I was the only one with the wherewithal to actually go home and be her 24/7 caregiver in the end. We did okay for the first year with the chemo and everything, and it's hard for me to say this, but the chemo part was easy, and we all know that is not an easy part of anything, but actually it was easy compared to the last 6 months when she couldn't really take care of herself, and it wasn't safe for her to be living alone. I am a marketing person, right? So, I work in a fast-paced ad agency type world, and I didn't know anything about oxygen tanks or how to manage healthcare workers or really anything, not anything. And it was really hard. And I think aside from the medical things that are hard for caregivers like us, because we just don't come from that world, I think the emotional terrain is extra difficult. And I was touched by the tools that I did not have in my tool bag. I thought, I was pretty highly evolved, and I would be able to be loving and caring. But things happen when you're caregiving that are devastating to you. And I know I've seen in your film, Susie, how devastating it's been for you. And it's a little different when somebody's they're cognitively fine. I don't know. I don't want to be in the contest. First of all, is what I always say. We don't want to compare caregiving experiences.
No, there's no contest.
No, they're all hard. But let's say
they're all hard.
Yeah, like I had a very forceful and opinionated mom as well, and we were fighting from her deathbed, basically. She was like telling me how to do the laundry and stuff from her deathbed, and I'm standing in the laundry room, not wearing my beautiful Tokyo businesswoman high-end garb, right? And
Right.
the whole bit, and wearing tights and slippers and looking pretty schlumpy, doing the laundry, the dishes, and everything else. And I'm thinking, Jesus, I just can't wait to go back to my own house and just do a load of laundry by myself with the way I want to. And I used to put extra soap in there, and I used to do like little passive aggressive things, because it's really hard. It's hard, and
It is hard, and you get sucker punched every 5 minutes. Just when you think you know what's going to happen, you get sucker punched, and you're like, "Whoa, what happened? How did that happen? Where did that come from?"
Yeah, and you're constantly being put back into those childhood situations, and then you're trying to be an adult, and you're having to learn how to say no as well, I think, and draw your boundaries. I had an experience once with my mom where we had help in the house that morning, and I hadn't been able to go out and take a walk. So, I wanted to take a couple of walks a week. It was really important to get out and see the trees and stretch my legs. And my mom said, "I don't want you to go." And I had a fight with her. Right. And the healthcare professional even told me, "You shouldn't talk to your mom that way." And I won't tell you what I said to her. Okay.
Okay.
But, I said, I basically pulled her aside and I said, "You haven't been around here for 55 years. You don't know what goes on here." So
yeah, they don't know that dynamic or anything.
Please don't say that to me ever again. And
oh my God. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that, because I know we've all gotten to that point. I mean, there was a point where I literally was going to, my mom is tiny, right? I was going to pick her up and put her in her room. I had to stop. I was like, if you don't listen to me, I am picking you up and putting you in your room. I'm like, where is this coming from?
Yeah, it's so funny. And you really have to dig deep to make it through in one piece. And so I was really touched by my experience, and being a market researcher and a writer, a business writer at the time. Now I think I'm a little wider than that, but I just felt compelled to write about my experience so that some other people who found themselves in this experience might be able to do it a little better and be a little more prepared. And we were pretty prepared in my family, and we had a lot of resources. I would say it was about as good as it gets, but it almost killed my sisters and I. The three strapping 50-year-old something girls, switching off. And anyway, I just came out of that experience with a real desire to simply share my experience so that maybe a few other people could do it a little better. And then as I researched it, I saw how bad the problem was. I couldn't believe that, I had never even heard the word caregiver in 2007 before I became one. And I really didn't know the word until after my mom passed away.
Oh, yeah. I used to think it was caretaker.
Caretaker.
I thought
They
it was
used
a
to say
caretaker.
Yeah.
But I realized, and I was get corrected all the time by people say, "No, it's caregiver." And I realized, oh, you're right. It is that makes more sense. I mean, the same thing to me. I didn't know what it was.
Right,
at
right.
all.
And then they call it
Yeah.
carer in the UK and in Australia and
do,
New
yes.
Zealand. So there are some
Yes.
different terms, and actually that's part of the problem is that even when I talk about it today, like a lot of people think I'm talking about professional caregivers as opposed to family caregivers. So we've got a lot of
Right.
confusion in the landscape, and I think doing things like what we're doing helps clarify that confusion and get everybody straight on it. But I think another fear underneath for everyone is that you really don't want to be one, right? You don't.
No.
I don't want to be one again.
No.
I can tell you
No.
that.
No. Lisa Gibbons says there's like nobody grows up saying I want to be a caregiver when I'm a grown up. There's no caregiver Barbies.
Yeah, exactly. And so it's a really hard topic. I've had my girlfriends when we're out at really nice dinners, eating at great, starred restaurants in Tokyo, and I'll be going on and on about my topic because that's what I do. And they'll go, Debbie, please stop talking about it. I can't take any more. And I just say to them, well, okay, fine, I won't do it tonight, but you need to look deep inside yourself and think about this because this is going to happen to you. And even if,
It's
if
coming.
you stick
It's
your head in
a-coming.
the sand if you want to, it's okay. But if you at least have some kind of emotional grasp that this is going to happen, then you might be able to take the next step and have those conversations with your family, loved ones, and at least start talking about what's going to happen. And those are really difficult discussions to get to happen.
Were your friends that you had the dinner with, were they Americans or Asians, or were they Japanese? Or I'm curious in terms of culture.
Well, one of the great things about Tokyo is that you get to hang out with people from all over the world because we all go there to, seek fame and fortune or whatever you want to say. But I think that night it would have been a Brit, a New Zealander, and a Japanese person and myself. So it was pretty mixed. But none of them had been caregivers yet. And none of them had responsibilities yet. Their parents were a little younger than myself, so their parents were still in pretty good shape.
Right.
And they just were not willing to go there.
Yeah.
Because it's a very difficult topic.
Well, it is, and it really triggers a lot of different undesirable thoughts about our own mortality, and people don't want to listen. It's not easy. It's not easy, and but it's necessary. And I really think if the conversation started like in schools and from the time where we are taught from little kids that this is the cycle of life and this is okay, then we would be better people for it.
I love that idea, Susie. And I think one of the interesting things that I see, for example, the difference between Japan and the U.S., is that in Japan we have a far lower incidence of older people living in assisted living. So the cultural tradition in Asia would be to help your parents to age in the home.
Right.
And in Japan, traditionally, the parents leave everything to the oldest son, and the oldest son and his family rebuild the original house so that the older parents can live there as well. So you'll have like 3 generations living in one household. And we are actually turning back to that in this country, in part because of economics. But of course, in Japan, it's a little bit less than 10% of households. It used to be much higher, like 20, 30%, but now it's at about 10%. But what that does, that multi-generational living, is to expose the young kids, the grandkids, to the grandparents, and on a daily basis, so that they can see that, there's some problems there, and maybe I can help, and it becomes more normalized.
Oh yeah, it's not frightening. It demystifies it, and it makes it normal. Absolutely, we saw that in assisted livings, like some of the caregivers when my mom was when she was much more, she was walking and talking, and she was much more less dependent. A lot of the caregivers would bring their children and their children, and I mean like 5-year-olds and 6-year-olds, and they were just, it was like a day at, another day in life. They had no issue if Jack was screaming over there, about something that, where is this? And where's Jack? I'll get it for you. Here it is. You take it,
Yeah,
and
it's
so
normal.
they didn't care. It's normal.
Yeah, it's like, your best skiers are kids who started at 3 years old. And why is it? They've been exposed to all the things that could happen to them. They have no fear. Our fears come from the unknown. And if you've lived in the unknown for 40, 50, 60 years because you haven't had to deal with it, when it hits, it's magnified. And so, yeah.
Oh my God.
Mhm.
Yeah, my son-in-law,
Yeah.
before my daughter and he were married, he came to visit my mom at assisted living, and he was approached by one of the residents and who was talking his ear off. And it was, he was in a different state of mind. The resident was feeling a little lonely, and he was talking to my son-in-law like, really sad, I'm really lonely. And my son-in-law, not having any experience in this situation, excused himself and went outside and cried because it was so emotional for him. He didn't know how to compartmentalize what was happening. And he had no tools to deal with it.
It's a really big shock.
And then eventually, as he
that's
got used to it, he was great with it.
He's
he
a
was
pro.
always great with the
He's a
residents.
pro.
Yeah, it's fantastic. But if that started at 3 years old, and it became just part of our lives, that would be so important.
It would be fantastic. It would make every aspect of life so much better. But what I'm excited to talk to you about is well, first of all, your book, which really touches caregiving crisis. It is the hot topic for me, and what can we do? Drop us some wisdom here. Drop us some wisdom, Debbie.
Oh, well, you're very kind, Susie. I mean, I think for me, what's really interesting about the caregiving crisis in our world is that it didn't start with the pandemic.
No.
Many of us know about it because of the pandemic. Thank goodness. It's one of the only good things about the pandemic. But it's been going on for 30 years or more. I can show you statistics, and we can put reports and things in the show notes, whatever you would like to do. But honestly, people at high level positions have been talking about this since at least 1990. And I find that really sad and shocking in our world. And I think we all know that other things get in front of, there's all kinds of issues out there, and other things jump to the head of the line. But caring for older adults has been pushed back to the back of the line for a long time. And I personally am pretty tired of it. I've been covering this, and I say covering it, I do have a journalism degree. I've been covering this landscape since 2007 or 8, let's say, right in the thick of it in 7 and 8, and then trying to rebuild my life from 2009 to 2015 from the devastation that occurred financially and everything else.
I'm with you, sister.
Not just because of the caregiving.
I'm with you.
Yeah,
I was there right with you.
Yeah, and when I came out of my caregiving situation where my mom had just died, it was global financial meltdown. You'll remember that in 2008.
It's when I went through my divorce, when my mom came, and this was the start of my issues. Like my house turned upside down. It was a complete avalanche of one bad thing after another. Yes. I'm with you.
Yes.
Yep.
And then for me, and I rebuilt my business, and then in 2011 we had the earthquake in Japan, and it wasn't just an earthquake. It was, if you'll remember, it was an earthquake, a tsunami, and a nuclear meltdown. I digressed, but I saw how difficult the situation was for caregivers, and so while I was saving myself and thinking about all that I had gone through and grieving for my mom, I had this idea in the back of my mind to help caregivers, other people who would have to go through this situation. And so finally my book came out in 2018. So you see, that's 10 years after my mom passed away. And I tried to make it a few years before that, but I just couldn't push it over the line. And of course, for her 10-year anniversary of her passing, that was a really important benchmark for me. So I did get that out, and I was proud of that. But I think one of the things that, again, is so shocking to me is this pretty much blatant lack of awareness about the problem and what we're going to do about it. It's always like, oh, well, that's a family problem. They'll take care of that themselves, or that's a government problem. The government will take care of that. You know, it's not happening. It's not happening because the problem is so big, and it's got so many facets that no one body puts their hands around it and fixes it.
Right.
Which is so strange because it's the only thing that affects everybody. It's the only cause that affects everybody, you know, and not to downplay any of the other causes that are, you know, cancer and Alzheimer's and all, you know, it's the only thing that affects all of humanity. And so for that to be pushed aside, it's just, it's inexplicable.
Well, because we all age, right? And correct me if I'm wrong, but we have a lot of science now that extends our lives, right? So we are able to live significantly longer, and then which is great. But then there's no emphasis on the quality of that extra time that we're buying, right? So we have a lot of people that are living into their 90s and even 100, and they are able to live, but they're not living. And so,
there's no means to take care of them.
The means is, and what's happening is, and I think, and you're going to be the expert on this because I am just, I'm just a girl who's trying to figure out how to work this system, but it feels to me.
I'm just a girl in the world.
That's right. I just feel that, we are going to be bankrupting all of our safety that we've set up, like our Medi-Cal and Medicaids and Social Security, because how long can it last if there's not, we need to focus and really put some constructive, redefining of the system, from some infrastructure is what we need to support.
Yes, and I believe that so much, Susie, and it's just not working, right? It hasn't been working for 30-something years, and the demands are really increasing now, exactly for the reason you said. We're living longer. We're not necessarily living better because we don't have a prevention-minded society. And if we thought about preventing and being, like living that last 10 years super healthy, is different than just simply living those last 10 years.
Right.
That's
like, let's define living. Right.
Yes, let's define living, and I think we are also seeing, for example, when you end up being a caregiver, and it's not all women, but it skews towards the female side. But let's just take the classic situation where you're a 49-year-old female. You basically have to use some of your money to help your parent or your loved one. You end up perhaps giving up your job to be a full-time caregiver. You lose benefits from Social Security and, of course, your salary that you're not getting anymore. And you're going into your own savings. And this is all documented very, very, very well. And so what we end up with is many, many women at the old ages being pauperized because they have used all their money and benefits, and they don't have as much as they should have had because they had to drop out to be caregivers. And we also have, of course, many, many single women who fall into this bracket. But it's just a big problem. It's a big problem that's future-minded.
It's huge. It's huge. It's huge. And I know it's not listen, I grew up in Los Angeles. I'm in the entertainment industry. There's nothing more, there couldn't be anything in the opposite direction than this conversation, make believe. Let's, everything is surface. And, no, people in LA spend their lives, trying to stay young and vital.
Yes.
And, we can't do that only on the outside. We have to do it from the inside. And, how many of our, just even Valerie Harper from my movie, what a warrior she was, and a role model for this, such a role model, and living her best life till the day she left this life, as best as she could. Right, Don?
Absolutely. I mean, it's, and then you look at these are people with means have a difficult time with this. Most people don't. The vast majority of people, and as you say, this is not just here in the United States. This is a global issue, and I would, probably 90% of the people on this earth do not have the means to take care of somebody in their end years. It doesn't exist. So it's such a massive problem that we look at it and go, well, it's so big. How could we possibly solve it? How can we possibly solve it?
Before you start, we have a guest that I met online who is a professional caregiver in Sweden. And, this is a guy in his prime of his life. He has 2 daughters. He's such an amazing human being. But, in Sweden, everyone seems to be well taken care of. And we sort of cringe at any kind of...
well, but God forbid you say anything that might sound like socialism. Good God, we cannot have that.
Yeah, you can't say that. You can't
say
that, Don.
I'm saying
Don't
it.
say it. No.
Okay, but I'm so interested in this idea of global best practice sharing. So I'm glad you brought up Sweden, because Sweden and Denmark, some of the Scandinavian countries have some fantastic programs. And it doesn't, I know the S word is not, something we can say in America, but, what we're doing doesn't work. So why wouldn't we look at this particular situation? Yes. And why would we have supports for care for children, for example, and not care for older adults?
Exactly.
I don't get why it's okay to let elders sit in urine for hours, as you said, Susie, earlier.
Yeah.
Just really, is that okay? I don't think so. And I think if we are a society, a human-minded society, we must look at these different ways. And maybe we have a little bit of S in this area.
Yeah, I mean, even in Britain, they have national health care, right? So, and there's and it's it really helps the society. Okay, it does. It just does. I remember.
It does,
and
my
ex is from Britain, and I remember him, saying countless times, it's frightening when he used to come here when he wasn't a citizen, because if, God forbid, he got in an accident or he got sick, he wouldn't be able to take care of go into the hospital, because he didn't have health insurance, where you wouldn't have that fear. In Britain is, you have the National Health Care Service, and they take care of everybody, and that's part of society. That's part of being civilized, is to take care of everybody. And we also have an immense devaluation for the elder, as if they're worthless, because they're growing the opposite way. Children are going to
they'll be gone
future.
soon anyway, so why bother? It's
exactly
right.
Exactly.
Right.
But you don't know what kind of contribution that person in their last 10 years might give, because all of us are looking at our last 10 years. We don't know. Nobody knows when they're going to pass. My father died in a plane crash.
Be looking at our last 10 minutes. We don't know.
Yeah, he was 46 years old, and he packed in a really big life. So, we don't know. And we don't know what someone at 95 might be inventing the next thing. You don't know. I mean, I just read Mel Brooks's book, and he is, at 95, one of the most entertaining, still the most entertaining, thoughtful, deep, wise human beings. And I don't think I would venture to say more so than a lot of, vital 30-year-olds. So whatever. you know.
Or just affecting their 5-year-old great grandchild,
Yeah.
that type of contribution. It doesn't have to be societal. It can just be,
True.
Personal. And
That is societal. It's a ripple effect.
Well, it does. Yeah,
It is the
absolutely.
ripple effect. Whoever you touch becomes a ripple effect. So, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. And I was really interested in what you said about Mel Brooks.
That's gems. Like, you're not going to get that from a 40-year-old or a 30-year-old. And I always say that, as a writer in Hollywood, everyone's so afraid of aging out because you're afraid to say if you're 40 or 50 because, the executives or the powers to be that hold the power will say, they're too old. We need younger and younger. Well, I'm sorry. The more life you have, the more you have to contribute. And these are the gems that you get along the way. You're not born with those gems. You earn those gems.
It's true. And
Right.
I'm chuckling at your term aging out. I hadn't heard that before. And I'm 68, right? And I really.
You look damn
I
good, lady.
really-
This is a beautiful 68-year-old.
Thanks.
Right, Dawn? Look at that.
Well,
Absolutely.
Well, and there's nothing happening here Hollywoodish, right? As you can see. But anyway, I think we do have a lot to offer as we age. Everyone has something to offer, as you say, Susie.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the different countries have things to offer in terms of looking at new ideas and ways of handling this challenge in our society. Japan has a national healthcare system as well. Mm-hmm. And they have services, like once you qualify as a care receiver to meet those activities of daily living or not meet them, right? You can't dress yourself, you can't cook. Then the national healthcare system certifies you as being ready to and able to receive certain services. So you can get a bathing service to come into your house. They have a portable unfoldable bathtub they'll set up right in your living room.
Wow.
And then there's one small, slight aide and a big burly guy, as burly as they come in Japan, and he'll set up the tub and
Oh my
and
God. My mom would be all over
female will
him.
do the bath. yeah.
My mom would
I know
be,
you-
hello.
I need a bath.
Oh,
I need
that's
a bath.
that's
I need
so.
a bath.
I need a bath.
It's so
I need
funny.
a bath.
It's so funny. And they have house cleaning services and cooking services and all kinds of things. And I'm not saying that any country is perfect in this. None of them are. All countries are having big challenges with this because the demands are so great. But I think I just would like to see our country look at the other countries and consider how we might be able to bring some of these things in.
You're so
we
right.
actually have some of these things available to us, but they're actually hard to find and get. Like there's something called the PACE program, PACE, through Medicare and Medicaid that I literally just heard about in November. And I had not known about that. It's different in every state, and this is one of the problems, right? Like you're a caregiver, you have to become a researcher practically to find these things and then fight with the bureaucracy to get them. So there are issues. It should be easier. I have a big issue with us giving 800 numbers to caregivers. I'm like, come on, give me a real person to talk to. Give a beleaguered caregiver a real human being to talk to about their problems and questions. Don't make me call an 800 number.
And also, I think you're right about the states being regulated. So there's a consistency, right? Because, I had a real issue with elder law, and I was trying to protect my mom's, her estate. And every time I went into the court room, I had no standing, even though I was her official conservator
yeah.
a person. But the judge kept saying, understood, but you do not have standing. What does that mean? I don't have standing. And
Did you not? Wow.
She wasn't
You have-
conservator
it's
of
state
the
to
estate.
state.
She was conservator of person.
I see.
So she was supposed
But
to
the
make
job
the
outline
decisions, but she couldn't
for her
control the money. It's like- It's
So
insane.
I needed to get an accounting, and I couldn't get an accounting. And then I was like, I just want to have, an outside professional fiduciary take over the estate so that everything is open to everybody. I didn't want to
That
take
makes
it.
sense.
Yeah, but it was a fight, and I ended up having to just cut my losses and deal with whatever I was given and just make the best of it, but that's another issue because, speaking to elder law experts, it is a problem because it's state to state different. So why is it? That's stupid.
It is. It is.
stupid.
And I just wrote that. I wrote that on my list, Susie, because I think, standardizing some of the ways that these things are handled from state to state would be a big contribution.
Sure.
And having special circumstances for Alzheimer's and dementia patients, such as in your case, that's a really important thing. That's a really important thing.
It brings up a lot of things. Like my mother's living trust was created while she had Alzheimer's from my sibling. Well, she wasn't really aware what was going on. She had her own will. She didn't want to have a living trust. Right? So, and I know that when she was lucid, because she would say, "Where's my money?" And I'd say, "Well, it's in a living." What? When did that happen? I said, "When you signed that paper."
Yeah, no, it's these are really, really troubling situations. And I think it gets back to probably the most important thing that any of us can do is to have a plan. And it doesn't have to be, your plan's going to change. Whatever plan you make now,
Yeah.
it's going to change. But for example, in my mom's case, when she was 65 and I was 45, she forced my sisters and I to have the conversation with her about her will, who got what. She had stickies on the bottom of all the furniture so that we all wouldn't fight.
That's unusual. That's really unusual.
It is
because they don't want to
unusual. Well,
talk
my
about
mother
it.
was-
They usually don't want that.
My
yeah.
mother. It's so true, Dawn. And usually, we did not want to talk about it, okay? But my mother had just seen her father die,
Right.
okay? And she was in the midst of caring for her own mom, who she had to put in a home because she had some dementia. And it was just a heartbreaking situation. And so my mom was driven by her own personal experience to get her affairs in order.
Right.
And it was fantastic for her daughters because we all knew, and we had talked about it 10 years before she actually got cancer.
Yeah.
And that was amazing. Now, there were just a few things that we didn't cover off when we were talking and planning, and those are my, I don't want to use the word regrets, but I will. If I had to name a few things, that I wish I had done differently, for example, one of them would have been to have take that discussion and go even further to what happens when you're bedridden and I cannot handle all your needs, right? Because that happened to us.
Right.
And my mom wanted to die at home. We were under strict orders that if she had a problem, we were not to call 911. Now, and I'm going to tell you another funny story because it is funny to me, and things. I think we all need to be gentle with ourselves and look for the good and the humor in the situations
Absolutely.
as well. And we always did that in our family anyway. But my mother and I had a discussion, and once someone is sick and knocking at death's door is not a good time to be having these conversations.
100%,
Okay, that's why I say just do it now. When
Right.
even if it's hard, it's going to be hard.
Right.
But do it now. It's going to be harder later. So my mother, she would have coughing attacks because she had cancer,
Right.
lung cancer, and I would say. I said, Mom, this is scary, right? What if you have a coughing attack, you fall on the floor, and I think you're going to die. You don't want me to call 911 in that situation? She goes, no, absolutely not, because then I'll get stuck in the hospital, and I don't want to die in the hospital. And I said, but you know that if I have to do that, it's going to screw me up for the rest of my life, right? You know that. She goes, yes, I know that. And Oh my God, and I'm so thankful that it didn't happen,
Oh,
guys, because
yeah.
it
It
could have happened.
It
Yeah,
could
and then you're
have,
like,
and
wait,
it's
It
funny.
could
and it's something they
I
could
was
literally
just-
come and just say and fix her up there and put her back into bed.
Exactly,
And you're like, no, I'm going to let
exactly.
you die here.
No, they
It's
don't
like,
do
yeah.
that.
No,
They
it's
don't
crazy.
do that because
It's crazy. Yeah.
legally they have to take them to the hospital.
Yeah.
My mother, we just had that conversation with another colleague of ours last night. I said, because my mother being in the hospital now, and my mom used to say to me when we'd go to visit people, she'd go, Susie, not me. And so, because, she didn't want to end up like that. And I said, I hear you, Mom.
No one does.
But then,
Yeah.
like as her, Alzheimer's progressed, and I'd go to see her and I'd say, hi, Mom, how you doing? And she'd go, I'm great. I'm alive. And you realize that as she's going, life is good, right? So as, she no longer had that bravado of like, not me, and so, as much, like you said, you make plans, but plans change. Right?
They do. But having a plan to begin with is gives you much better flexibility when you do have to change it.
Yeah.
So if there's any one thing I would want everyone on the planet to do is have these conversations with your family. I reckon it's about 5% of our families on the planet who have had these proper heartfelt discussions, thinking through all the way to the end, because it's hard to talk about, and people don't want to talk about it, either the parents or the kids. So planning is the big banana, I think.
Well,
when it comes to
listen,
caregiving.
everybody, I am the one that hates talking about it. I hate it like more than life itself. Like my mom and I would go, no, because we didn't want to hear about it. We were just like, you're not dying and I'm not dying.
Yeah.
That's it, done. We're just not going to do it. We refuse, and so this is my lot in life to embrace it. That's why I'm in this community, and I'm learning to be a big girl and embrace it and help others that are scaredy cats like me embrace it, because it's super important. And if you love someone as much as I love my mom, you have to embrace it, and you have to
Yes.
embrace it with grace.
Yes.
And, and
It-
humor
it-
and laughter. And if you like a little
Yes.
wine, have some wine.
Yeah.
I like to get my dance on. That's my wine. But, all right. So before we could talk all day. Honestly, I see this. This is.
I know we could.
But
Yeah.
I want to just get to your book about caregiving crisis, because you're talking about a corporate situation, which I think is where we really need to make some substantial changes, corporate and state government and things like that, and which is why we're going to, create some kind of coalition so that we can make some really big movements. But you talk about companies that are they're losing billions of dollars annually. What is happening there?
Well, there's a real slow leak of money from every company, because caregiving for older adults affects 30% of every company's workforce. And people don't know this. It was 20% before the pandemic, but of course now it's 30%. And again, I'm drawing the line between caring for older adults and let's say young kids at home, or even I'll include the sandwich givers in that statistic.
Okay.
The statistics are a little muddy, but we know 30% of every workforce is caring for older loved ones. That's huge. It's huge. And you can imagine the impact when it comes to absenteeism, to productivity, with people having to go take care of things on an emergency basis, and also with future healthcare costs. So when you are a beleaguered caregiver and you are physically challenged and emotionally challenged and even financially challenged, that affects you in the future. So the company's healthcare costs go up as well. So you're not only looking at the time when they're a caregiver, when productivity can be hampered, but also you have about a third of all caregivers literally leaving their jobs. So retention is a problem, or turnover, the cost of turnover. So it costs twice as much as someone's annual salary to replace them. So, and you have the loss of institutional knowledge, and there are other intangibles, but there are actual costs related to caregiving that companies are spending to the tune of $68 billion a year right now. And that's going to more than double in the next 20 years. And again, these are slow leaks of money. They're not monitored very well. Companies don't have good benchmarks in it because they're just sort of absorbing it. But what I'm advocating in my book is to get your head around what this is costing you as a company. Get your head around how this is impacting 30% of your workforce, which I think is significant.
Yeah.
And do something about it. And there are some really easy and low-cost ways to fix this problem in a company. And I'm just going to mention, like one obvious one is like this. Look at what you're offering all your other employees and see if you can't add a caregiver component to it. So you're offering stress management, let's say, or financial planning. Add a component or two, a module or two that addresses the needs of caregivers. So that's the first easy, cheap thing every company can do. And I don't see why anybody wouldn't do that for 30% of their workforce. And by the way, this caregiver issue cuts across all ethnicities. It is a DEI issue as well. I'm saying that caregivers of older adults are a special segment of your workforce.
Yeah.
And let's carve them out and address their needs because they cut across the whole thing. We know that there are younger
too.
caregivers.
I was just going to say that. Yeah,
generationally now.
Absolutely.
Of the 53 million caregivers in America, a quarter of them are millennial aged.
Yep.
That's astounding, right? We never knew that before. And that happened before the pandemic, by the way. So it's even greater now.
For sure.
But we have more men, we have more male caregivers, more younger caregivers. And the reason is because there's not enough people to help our aging population.
Right,
so
right.
everyone is having to pitch in.
Well, because our aging population our aging population is as big as it's ever been, and it's only going to get bigger. So
that's right.
Yeah, we are at the we're heading into an area that this is going to get, like you say, down the line, this is going to just be exponentially more of a problem unless we do something about
it really
now.
is.
Totally. I mean, like this, it feels like the apocalypse. Like if we don't take care of it now, like we'll have older people on the streets living like, it's a tragic thing to even think about. Well, if you're talking about, I'm looking at your notes, $68 billion annually in caregiver-related costs that aren't really constructive. They're a reaction and not coming from a plan. So these are reactionary.
They're just the bleed.
Exactly.
Yeah, they're just the bleed from the results.
So why
of the
can't we
caregivers.
take that $68 billion that's being bled out and use it as a prevention and a plan? To like you give, there's maternal leaves, there's maternity leaves that people get paid for. Why aren't we getting paid for caregiving leave? Why? Why not?
Exactly. And that would be another example, Susie, of easy to fix programs, easy to expand programs. You've already got it. Just expand it. Expand the coverage.
Right.
And that's fair. That would be fair. It wouldn't be fair to only help people with young kids in your company.
And also,
what is that?
It's what you're presenting. At least what you're presenting is that it's actually, it's economically sound for the company. It makes sense on a business level for them to probably cut that loss, maybe even in half. I don't know. I'm not an accountant, but an economic at all. I don't know economics, but I'm looking at it and just on my intuition and looking at the number thinking, well, $34 billion, if they cut that in half and, where's that extra $34 billion going? So, we could be, that would go a very long way. That would go a very long way.
It would. And if you just think about retention alone, and we know about the problem with turnover and retention because of the Great Resignation and everything. And if we can stop that first in a company, that's going to help the company overall. And one of the problems is companies they don't benchmark. Nobody's counting anything, so we don't know. We know some things, and thank goodness to Harvard Business Review for putting out a report called The Caring Company, where they did come up with a figure for this. So we know certain things, and we'll know more over the future. I get my clients to first of all get some KPIs in place. key performance indicators so they can start benchmarking what it is actually costing their company in terms of, again, productivity, absenteeism, future healthcare costs, turnover, and then we can look at that next year, right? We can see if it's better, and then, Susie, we can start to understand what that number means. So I think it's happening now, thank goodness, and we just have to keep pushing at it.
How do we
But
do
I
that?
think
How do we
companies,
push at that? What do you recommend? Like, what do you think?
Well, I think there are many people like us out there who are caregivers who are actually speaking up, sharing our stories, talking about solutions. I think that's a given. I think anything we can do in the area of film, as you have done, and wider consumed entertainment, if you will, to show these instances, for example, of older people giving back until they die, and the good side. I wrote down when we were talking to like the aging heroes type thing. You know, who are some examples of heroes as they age? You know, who show everyone else how this is true, and then companies. It's not just the money that they save, it's the goodwill that they create with their employees for doing the right thing, actually. And lots of companies are trying very hard now to do the right thing. And I just want to make sure that you know, older caregivers are in the queue for discussion.
Right.
I don't want that off the table. So I think we just keep talking, talk as wide as we can, talk to more than just the usual suspects.
Right.
Spread the message out as wide as possible, and you know, I hate to use this, but be the change. You know, be it. Just be it.
I think when it comes to businesses, and if you know, I work for a small business where this may not, so far, you know, in the time I've been here with this company, which has been a long time, this has not been an issue per se, but you can, you know, just like you did with eventually having companies, you provide health care because, you know why? It makes sense for the company too, not only for the employee. And I think you have to show that even though this costs something, in the long run, it makes sense for the company financially. Because in the long run, it's all about it's about the dollar. In the long run, it's all about the dollar. And if you can show, and if you can get larger companies to maybe, you know, if you have something like Apple or, you know, some of the huge companies saying this is now a program we're doing, and we find that even though it costs us, in the long run, it saves us. You need those types of companies to set the standard, and then everyone go, oh, okay, that makes sense. But we're not. It's not even in a discussion right now, as far as, you know. I mean, it's obviously in discussion, but not on a wide enough level. And I think that's what we need to do. You need to show that yes, it will cost you, but it's going to save you in the long run.
I mean, I was just talking to a colleague who said there's a bill that's been in Congress, you know, to touch one or two of these, you know, issues that we're talking about, and you know, I want to say 80% have signed off on it, and it's been sitting there since last
senators,
April. Yeah, it's been sitting there.
I know. I'm incensed about that, Susie.
Yeah.
And not only that, but in that bill, the first draft of that bill completely left out older adult care. Completely. It was all about helping carers of younger children.
Oh, I didn't know that.
And not even
disability
challenged children.
Okay.
Not even disabled children. So just younger children, because that was a big thing in the early days of the pandemic with the kids at home and everything. And absolutely, that was a big problem. No one will say it wasn't a problem. That was a problem.
What a slap in the
face! But
why
would we? What
a slap in the face for everybody else.
But I know that
I don't get it.
I know that in like Build Back Better, Biden's program, elder care is part of that. It's not just.
It is, but it's really small.
It's not. It's not big enough. I mean, it's a step, but it's not. You know, it's not a solution.
I've said this before, but you know, the healthy residents, the very healthy residents where my mom is at during the pandemic, the people that became my friends that were in their 90s and very vibrant people have passed away because they were isolated, and there was no.
Yes, we talked about
Yeah.
Yes.
And it's like,
that's huge.
It's huge. And the fact that, you just because you're now, so you're isolating them so that they don't die from a disease, so they die from isolation.
Yes. Yeah. And that's a real
what
problem.
is going on? Like how who's not looking at that? That doesn't make any sense to me.
Yeah, we just have, and I think this is, in fairness, this is it's like that, how do you eat an elephant thing, like it's so big and it's so, like you can't even see the front of the elephant from the back, right? You can't see the whole problem, so you can't. It's difficult to address, and it's difficult for one agency to address. There's a lot of action going on, but I think we just, I'm hoping, here's my big hope. My hope is that the pandemic has shown us the way forward in terms of looking at this problem in a little bit more holistic way, because it has forced us to see it in new and different ways. So, fingers are crossed, that all of this talking and work that we're doing, and you get a few examples, like we just need a few big companies to stand up and show, this is what we're doing because it's the right thing to do. And we need it. I want to see it as a metric on the best workplaces to work, for example.
That's awesome.
And we know that millennials already are asking about that benefit, a caregiving benefit now. So we're
I didn't know that. That's surprising, because I was thinking that the millennials, since it was so difficult to get them to vote, that they have been. I thought they were the silent generation in a way. So that's interesting to hear.
Well, I think what's interesting about them, and this is just a little bit of a sidebar, but not much. But like, I originally thought my target was people like me who were just about to be caregivers. But actually, because, for example, there was a whole generation of women who had kids at a later age.
Yeah.
The millennials are now facing caregiving challenges. And what I find about the millennials is they're actually more open-minded to have this conversation, because they're more real. The baby boomers are like, I'm not getting old. I'm not getting old.
Exactly.
They're more scared about, like, and I can say that because I am one, but I'm not getting old. It's not going to happen to me. But the millennials are more realistic somehow. They seem to be, to me, when I listen to, because
they look at their
say,
parents and go, "Oh God."
Well, and there's been some fantastic work. There's been some really fantastic work. There was a PBS documentary called Fast Forward that dressed up the millennial kids. They paired the kids and the parents. They dressed the millennial kids in this aging suit that MIT has. And it weights you down and doesn't allow you to, it emulates being old.
Wow.
So they created empathy, and it was fantastic. And these are wonderful.
Oh man, we should put that in
ways
school.
Of learning.
That should be in every school. Why isn't that in every school? So we need to create empathy. Holy cow.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
I love that.
And one daughter she and her mom had the plan that the mom was gonna live in a like an RV on her property as she aged. So they did an experiment where she actually came and lived there. And the mom couldn't even hardly move around the thing, and it proved to be impractical. Mm-hmm. The idea and the plan was not working.
Right.
And you could see them learning this together, and you could see the compassion that they both gained for each other, and they were able to come up with another plan instead of that one, because that one wasn't going to work. But it was a really good documentary. You'll want to check that out.
Oh, cool.
It's fun. It's called Fast Forward.
We'll put it in the notes. So I have one last thing to say. So I just want to say this: Mark Cuban, who just did this whole generic drug company, and it's fantastic. And I think we need to get him on our side. Go, Debbie.
He's
go.
from Texas, isn't he?
Yes.
Isn't he from
Yes.
Texas? Okay.
Yeah, he owns the.
I'm on
owns
it.
the
Let me
Dallas
see.
Mavericks. He's, yeah.
Yeah, go, Debbie, go. Get him.
He's
This
the
is
Shark
right up
Tank
his
guy.
alley. Yep.
Because he said he doesn't need to make any more money. He just wants to make change, and that's that's what we need.
And so we got some chores for him.
I think that we should look at at the positive. Hopefully, there's a positive to it. At one time, Companies did not offer health insurance. Companies did not offer maternity leave. Companies did not offer paternity leave. And it took time and it took effort, and it took effort by people like you, Debbie, and hopefully us, to make these changes. We can't expect them to happen overnight, but I know basically all you have to do to show people, how does it benefit you? And it's going to benefit everybody. So I think there is hope out there, but now's the time to make it happen.
Absolutely. I couldn't have said it better, and I love what you said about there were days when we didn't have health insurance or maternity leave and paternity leave, and I am really, really hopeful, actually, of making this happen. And there are many, many people working on it again. And if we all just keep pushing, there's an army out there of us.
Yeah. It's
absolutely.
cool to grow old because the alternative sucks.
In fact, we could
That's right.
These companies that have like childcare where you can bring your kid and they have we'll just make that for elderly too. We could just bring your mom to work.
Yep, absolutely. You could have elder care, and they could really be hooked to the same, because that would promote generational interaction.
Oh, for sure.
Absolutely.
It would be fantastic.
For
That
sure.
could be an expansion of what they're already doing.
Somebody's going to do it. Somebody's going to do it.
Yeah, well, I'm all for these easy, cheap solutions, right? I think the problem is big, but the solutions are, let's just get our hands dirty and get going,
I think we got to change the word old to something really cool and hip. Did you have anything else you wanted to say, Debbie, before we wrap up here today?
No, I just really appreciate your time and your invitation to be on your podcast. Thank you so much. And let's get out there and make some things happen. I know we can do it.
Hell
Great.
yeah. Heck yeah. All right. Well, thank you so much. And, all this effort it really does come from a good place. I know that everybody that I meet in this community is so heart-centered. And honestly, like I'm blown away by the compassion and the passion that comes from this community. It's really just fills you with so much hope, like you said, and it's very aspirational for me. I'm a heart-centered person myself, and so it's lovely to be around other people that are mushy-gushy like me, but we still get shit done, right?
Absolutely,
and so,
absolutely.
And that's why we call this show what it is. And what do we always say, John?
Well, what we always say, and it is so true, that is, love is powerful, love is contagious, and love conquers alls. And we're so happy you joined us today, and we can't wait to see you next time. And thank you, Debbie. It was wonderful having you here.
Thank you, Debbie. Thank you, everyone listening. Look at the show notes. Write if you have any questions and for her books, and also please subscribe and share to other people you think might benefit from the show. We love you, and we'll see you next time. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.